Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and in this one, we're going to be talking about our version of the Transformers Time Wars, which was originally a comic book series by Marvel UK, published in the late 1980s. But before we get into that, make sure you smash like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. That helps us out with the YouTube algorithm, but also we just love hearing from you guys. We've got an awesome community here, and it's all thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here. So, all that said, through the course of doing this podcast over the last several months, it's come to my attention that while I seems like the majority of people enjoy hearing me talk about our Transformers stuff in our game, the majority of people are not actually already familiar with Transformers. So, for those who are, I apologize that I'm going to talk about some stuff you're already well acquainted with in this adventure. Um, but for everybody else, I'm going to try to set things up so that this makes sense. So, right now, actually, we're celebrating 40 years of Transformers. And the Transformers animated series first aired on September 17th of 1984. And I was a huge fan, by the way. It is my favorite franchise of all time. I love Transformers. Um, and then in 1985, we got season two, the TV show. And then in 1986, we got Transformers the movie. And it was animated. And it a lot of really big changes happened in that movie. So first of all, there was a 20-year jump. So we went from 1985 to the year 2005. Another thing was that whereas before this, Hasbro seems like they were a little more hands off with stuff. So, for instance, the animated series continuity did not really line up with the continuity we saw in the Marvel comic book run. Well, when they were making the 86 movie, Hasbro got more involved, at least in my humble opinion. And one of the things that they kind of demanded was if a character represented a toy that they thought kids already owned or it was no longer for sale in many cases, they wanted that character to be killed off. That they thought the point of the show was to advertise the toys, and if the toy is no longer for sale, don't don't bother doing anything with that character, right? And I think that was a bad move. Personally, I think that's the moment that the 80s Transformers kind of died, honestly. Um, so one of the things going on, and this is going to sound really out of left field, but bear with me for a second. Like, I remember this one time when I was a kid, my grandma seemed to indicate that had divorce been normalized in her generation, and she was born in 1913, then she would have already divorced my grandpa. But she saw it as, I don't know what word I want to use, kind of like forbidden or taboo or whatever. It's not that it didn't happen, but it wasn't accepted like it is now, right? It wasn't commonplace way back when. And so then for the generation that would be like my parents and my aunts and uncles, that sort of thing, that's I think when divorce did become more commonplace, right? And so because of that, for my generation, and I'm almost 50 years old now, for my generation, there were a ton of little boys who were watching Transformers, right? Who didn't have a dad. And the number there was the highest it had ever been, ever, right? And so you might be wondering, like, what are you talking about? Like, what does this have to do with Transformers? Well, so Peter Cullen, who is the voice of Optimus Prime, he has said many times in interviews that it is extremely common for him at a convention for a guy my age to go up to him and just break down in tears and ask for a hug. And Peter Cullen is happy to hug these guys. And they all tell the same story, which is they'll say, I never knew my father. You know, you kind of raised me. And, mom was, working or whatever, right? Trying to make ends meet. And so a lot of kids, which are often referred to as latchkey kids, were watching Transformers. And it was something about the voice of Peter Cullen, um, Optimus Prime, in Cullen's words, he was tough but gentle. He was wise. He had a lot of really, really positive traits. And I feel like if I had to pick one word to describe him, it's probably fatherly, right? And so Optimus Prime had this massive fan following as a result. And so when Hasbro's like, yeah, kill him off, right? There were a bunch of kids that that was when they jumped ship. That was when they quit watching the show. And maybe I'll talk about that later. But at any rate, so I'm friends with Flint Dille, who's one of the co-writers of Transformers the movie. Um, Flint said that basically everybody at the company, which was Sunbow, who was doing this for Hasbro, um, everybody at Sunbow thought, we can't like make a better, let's use father figure as the word. We can't make a better father figure than Optimus Prime. Like we just can't top that, right? Cullen is like basically the best at that particular thing, right? So their approach was because the new leader, they had a toy that was going to be for sale called Rodimus Prime. And so their approach with him was they said, well, if he's just starting out as the new leader, maybe he's not experienced yet. And that was the direction, that was kind of um the spirit of the character then. That was sort of that guiding light for every decision they would make with him. So they decided he would start off as a character called Hot Rod, and he would be brash and impulsive. And, he hadn't really figured things out yet in life and stuff like that, right? And so in the movie, Optimus Prime and Megatron have this big fight. And at the end of the fight, Optimus Prime dies. Actually, he's mortally wounded, and they take him to kind of an operating room looking thing, and that's where he dies. But, you know, it's kind of neither here nor there. There's this also this so first of all, just that right there, all the fans, because Rodimus Prime is an insanely divisive character, right? Where the fandom is split, and some people love Rodimus Prime, and a lot of people hate Rodimus Prime. So the guys who, like I was saying earlier, they were maybe watching the show because they were attracted to Cullen's fatherly voice, that kind of thing. They weren't getting what they wanted out of the show anymore. You know what I mean? The other camp, by the way, there were a lot of young guys who they are young, they're impulsive, they don't have life figured out yet, so on and so forth. And a lot of them saw themselves in the Rodimus Prime character, and then that was why they liked him. But there's for sure this split. There's in the fandom, there's these two groups that are often, especially in the comments section on social media, they're kind of still, all these years later, kind of warring with each other to an extent. Um, and then another big thing that happened in the movie was there's this character called Unicron. And in my humble opinion, he was inspired by Galactus from Marvel. And if you know who Galactus is, he's this powerful cosmic being who devours worlds, to derive his sustenance. He found this guy, in his many travels named Norrin Rad, and he transforms that guy into a character called the Silver Surfer. And then the Silver Surfer works for Galactus, at least initially, right? So, in Transformers the movie, I think it's pretty safe to call Unicron a powerful cosmic being. He for sure devours planets. He finds a guy named Megatron, who, for anyone who doesn't know, is the leader of the bad guys. And he transforms him, no pun intended, into Galvatron. And after the movie, then Galvatron is the leader of the bad guys. And for a little while, he works for Unicron. So I think because Megatron and Galvatron were basically supposed to be the same guy, that it worked almost like a shoehorn. And I think it helped fans like Galvatron more. So even a lot of the fans who hated Rodimus Prime, they accepted Galvatron. And then he wasn't the only one to be reformatted like that, to change one character into a different character, basically. Uh, Starscream, who I think a lot of people are familiar with, um, he's famous for being Megatron's right-hand man who was constantly talking about how one day he wanted to be leader. So there's a point in the movie where Megatron seems to be dead. Starscream has become the leader. And then Galvatron shows up after that point and kills Starscream. So a lot of people missed Starscream then after that. Um, but Starscream, there were these two other guys who were shaped exactly like Starscream, but they had different color schemes. So one of them is called Skywarp, and he transforms into a black jet with purple stripes on his wings. The other one is a guy named Thundercracker, who transforms into a blue jet with red stripes on his wings. In season 1 of the animated series, these guys were a big deal. They were like really important characters. Um, and then there were some other characters in the movie that were basically black and purple robots with some like chrome and some yellow on them too. But at any rate, they, instead of transforming into jets or something like that, they transformed into these robot insects, like huge insects. Um, so all of these characters got reformatted into new characters, right? And these were the new toys that were sold that in 1986. And so the new characters are Cyclonus and Scourge and a group of guys who all kind of look like Scourge, and they were called the Sweeps. And just the point is, there were a lot of changes in the movie. And so when I say that fans missed Optimus Prime, right? That includes our players. That's where this is kind of becoming more relevant for the game. A lot of our players missed Optimus Prime, and they didn't really like the idea that after 2005, for instance, nobody would be able to play Optimus Prime in an adventure if the events of Transformers the movie took place. Um, and then likewise, some people liked the characters that were introduced in the movie, like Pup, Blur, RC, Springer, you know, the Junkions, whatever. Um, and they were kind of sad that in the 90s, when I was running most of these games in the 90s, they couldn't play them yet because they hadn't been introduced yet in the movie or whatever. So I became aware of these comic books called Time Wars. And I won't get too into the comic itself. That's not the point of my channel. Um, I'm here to tell you about my game. Sometimes it's based on comics, sometimes it's not. We took the basic concept from Time Wars and used, again, the very most basic take on it. We used that as inspiration, but also because, like I said, I ran this in the 90s. A huge inspiration was actually Terminator 2. And I feel like the later Terminator movies after Terminator 2, um, obviously your mileage may vary. You're welcome to have a different opinion than mine always. But in my opinion, um, they could never quite find that same tone again. And I think that those later movies left a bad taste in the mouths of a lot of people to where I now encounter people online all the time who not only hate those movies, but then in retrospect, they go back to Terminator 2 and they say, you know what, even that movie wasn't that great. But I got to tell you, when that movie came out, it was like a big deal. Like everybody I knew unanimously at the time thought it was just the greatest movie ever made. You know what I mean? Um, so for sure, we ripped it off more than once in our game. And so that was really more how we did Time Wars. So we decided that Galvatron, and there are time travel episodes of the Transformers animated series. Interestingly enough, the aerial bots for some reason seem to often be the ones involved in it, whether it's going back and meeting Orion Pax and see how he became Optimus Prime, which is kind of interesting because as of me recording this, Transformers 1 is now in theaters, and that's what that's about, kind of. Um, and then there was another episode where there was a character called Alpha Trion, who was an old man involved in Optimus Prime's origin story. I'll put it like that. There was another episode where we saw him kind of, become what he was famous for becoming. Um, but yeah, so time travel is a thing in Transformers. So we took Galvatron back in time to the 1980s, and he took his his Decepticons with him that you wouldn't normally see in the 1980s, like um Cyclonus and Scourge and the Sweeps and so on and so forth. And so their plan then is they're going to go kill Optimus Prime. And Optimus Prime, his chest, the windows on his chest are like doors and they can open up, and inside of his chest is this thing called the Matrix of Leadership. And there could probably be arguments about how it works. You know what? I won't get too into it because I really don't feel like arguing with people about it. It's sort of ambiguous, I think. I think that's sort of safe to say that it's important, but the specifics are a little nebulous about exactly what it does. At any rate, Galvatron wants it. That's really the point. That's kind of all you need to know about it. Is he wants the Matrix for himself. He wants to kill Optimus Prime, right? And so one of the reasons we did that was on the show, fans never really got to see a proper fight between those two characters. So we did it, right? And we rolled the dice, and we, as always, we used the tech specs because all those old toys, they had a thing on the back of the box. Because like Flint Dille, who wrote the movie and was overseeing the brand for a little while and stuff like that, also worked for TSR, and he'd worked on Dungeons and Dragons, and he for sure knew what a character sheet was. So it wasn't an accident that all the old Transformers toys basically had a character sheet on the back of the box, right? I'm flabbergasted that they never made a Transformers role-playing game in the 80s, but I digress. So we used the stats on the back of the box, which are called tech specs. We had a fight between Optimus Prime and Galvatron, and Optimus Prime won. And he tends to be merciful, so Galvatron gets away. You know, he's still alive. And so then after that, we ran a game where Galvatron meets Megatron. And then this is the other big thing, is people always wanted to see these characters fight, right? I'm saying characters plural. It's the same guy at kind of different ages, right? There was an interview with Frank Welker where he had been the voice of Megatron in season 1 and 2 of the animated series. And then he was the voice of Galvatron in season 3. And then people argue about whether you can call it season 4. It was just 3 episodes long, was this thing called the Rebirth, and he's also the voice of Galvatron in Rebirth. The point being, when when it came time for him to do the voice for Galvatron, he asked him if do you want me to keep doing the Megatron voice? And they said no. And what they told him at the time was, yes, you are Megatron, but you've been made young again. You're sort of like younger and stronger again, that kind of thing. And that Megatron was supposed to have been old enough that he was um battle weary and stuff like that. So that's how we played it. And I think that's a good way to think about the relationship with the two characters is, yes, Galvatron is older chronologically speaking, but he's been made young, you know. If that's confusing for some people, maybe think of like a Lazarus Pit from DC Comics, you know, that kind of thing. At any rate, so we had those two fight, and Galvatron won that one. So I thought that was kind of cool. Um, and so then what we end up with is the Decepticons kind of split, where Starscream, for instance, wanted to go hang out with Galvatron, um, which fans of Transformers are going to already know why that's a bad idea. But Starscream is like, oh well, if he won, he's more powerful, you know, I'll whatever. There's an advantage to be had by siding with him. And then it turns out Galvatron is not having it. That in Transformers the movie, Galvatron killed Starscream. Um so Galvatron's kind of just like, nah, I'm not putting up with your crap anymore. So Starscream, you know, runs away, of course, because Starscream's got a Starscream. Um, but we played out then through the course of many, many adventures. Um, things taking place between 1985 and 2005 to, well, I don't want to say bridge the gap, because the thing is, because of the time travelers, and they never leave, they stay there, right? Um, and I need to talk a little bit about Rodimus Prime for me to explain what comes next. So, Judd Nelson was in Transformers the movie as the voice of both Rodimus Prime, which is him when he's older, chronologically speaking, and Hot Rod, which is his younger self. And so at the start of the movie, Hot Rod is impulsive and brash and so on and so. Well, let me back up. I'm sorry. Let me back up a little bit. So there's a Transformers Hall of Fame, and one year they welcomed Judd Nelson into the Hall of Fame. And so he went to this Transformers convention, and I'm sorry, now I can't remember where it was at. And weirdly, a lot of the videos for this have been taken down, so that's kind of unfortunate as well. But at any rate, one of the things that happened at that convention was Judd Nelson watched Transformers the movie for the first time ever. And after the movie was over, they went outside and it was dark out. There was this stage out there. He was up on the stage taking questions. And somebody asked him about Transformers the movie, and I thought his answer was very interesting, which was he said, "That's not the movie I made." And everybody's like, "What are you talking about?" And so he said that he recorded a lot of lines that they didn't use. And there's huge chunks of story that got cut. And so he thought that the movie made less sense the way it got made versus what was in the script. And he said that the reason he accepted the role was based on what was in the script. And that what we finally got, he said, if I knew that's what the final product would have been, I would not have accepted. And I was so struck by that. And so he said that in the script, it is very clear, and this is going to make a lot of Hot Rod fans mad. He said that in the script, Hot Rod, basically says it's his fault Optimus Prime dies. It's not in question in the original version. They portray it as, yes, this is absolutely his fault. There are other characters who are mad at him, like, hey, you got our leader killed because you got involved in this fight that you had no business being a part of. And he's like, I was trying to help. And they're basically like, well, you messed it up, basically, blah, blah, blah. And so I thought that was interesting. And then through the course of the movie, he's trying to atone for his mistake so that by the end of the movie, everybody has kind of forgiven him. And then the idea was the viewers have then forgiven him, and he made things right. You know what I mean? That was supposedly what the original version was. And he said he thought that was really interesting, but that in the final cut, there's for sure a lot of fans who think it was Hot Rod's fault that Optimus Prime died. But that's a thing people argue about. And he does a lot of good things through the movie, but how do I want to put this? Like, it's never framed quite like atonement, I don't think. I think that the good deeds that he does, or when he's figuring things out, um, they don't connect the dots as much in the version we got. You know what I mean? So so to this day, there's like a lot of fans who hate Hot Rod slash Rodimus Prime. At any rate, though, so getting back to the game stuff, to the thing was, having heard that, we thought it was really important that, because I agreed with Judd Nelson and Flint Dille when he's been interviewed many, many times about this, and he wrote it. Flint Dille said that he wanted it to be Hot Rod's fault that Optimus Prime died. And Flint thought that Hot Rod would feel very, very guilty, that it was the worst thing he'd ever done, and it would haunt him. And we did get some scenes that are, again, kind of ambiguous, where, like, after the movie, they've built this big kind of gold colored statue of Optimus Prime. And we see Rodimus Prime doing stuff like talking to the statue. And he's saying, I'll never be the leader you were, Optimus. Like, that's one of his lines at one point. So it makes sense that, like, what Judd Nelson is claiming seems to be true, right? And it seems like there are kind of these little breadcrumbs of that plot are still left here and there, you know? So at any rate, we decided then that if Rodimus Prime goes back to the 80s with all of the characters like Blur, Cup, RC, the Junkions, you know, all these heroic characters that we were introduced to in Transformers the movie, that if they went back to the 1980s, the very first thing logically to me for Rodimus Prime to do is kind of the Marty McFly thing, right? Where Marty McFly tells Doc Brown, you know, in 1985, you're going to get attacked by Libyans, you know, so maybe wear a bulletproof vest, you know, that kind of thing. Um, we just ripped off that idea. So we had Rodimus Prime basically saying, look, Optimus in 2005, there's going to be this giant thing eating planets and stuff, and you're going to die. And, you know, so by giving him forewarning, then we played out the events of Transformers the movie. And so now, you know, and I know a lot of fans are going to want to argue whether or not they think Hot Rod slash Rodimus Prime was responsible for the death of Optimus Prime. And I don't really feel like having the argument. But for sure, we had Rodimus Prime be the reason that Optimus Prime now, because again, you know, we kind of go through the timeline once. We do things more like the movie did it. Those characters come back in time and now it's changed. So now we're on to like timeline 2, right? And then in timeline 2, Optimus lives. Everybody lives. Ironhide, Prowl, Brawn, you name it, right? All the heroes that we saw die in the movie are all alive. As a consequence, also, Thundercracker, Skywarp, the Insecticons, all those guys are alive. And they coexist now with like Cyclonus, Scourge, the Sweeps, so on and so forth. And so after 2005, then the way it is in our game is basically just everybody is alive. And the reason we did that was because Transformers is insanely popular with my circle of friends. And everybody likes these different characters. Everybody wants to play them in the game, and everybody thinks it's a huge bummer for people to be dead and that's you know, no longer on the table for them. It's no longer an option of something they could play. So we used the Time Wars to try to kind of fix that. And then as a result, um, so you know, in 2024 in our role-playing game, Galvatron and Megatron coexist and hate each other. You know what I mean? Um, so the Decepticons are more fragmented. They are not this unified group. And then there've been plenty of times when players have wanted to play Starscream, and we got a lot of guys who root for him. And then he's trying to attract his own followers, you know. Um, and then the way we run it is from the 1980s to 2024, because a lot of people said that they thought, um, and again, it's one of those things that different people are going to say different things, you know. There's not much is unanimous, right? But there were a lot of people who have said stuff like they thought that Rodimus Prime had a lot of potential and that he just never quite got there. You know what I mean? And so the decision that we made was that between the 80s and now, Rodimus Prime did get there, right? That he's not as impulsive and so on and so forth, right? So he still exists because now we've got two matrices because Optimus has one in his chest and then Rodimus has one in his chest. And then another thing that's kind of interesting is because, you know, Rodimus Prime went back in time because Optimus Prime never died, that means in 2024 we also have Hot Rod. So if you like the version that is young and brash and you know, hot-tempered and all that stuff, you know, we've got that for those guys too. So that was our intention, was we were trying to create kind of a win-win. We were trying to just give everybody what they wanted. And I mean, I know that's impossible. You can't make everybody happy all of the time, but we certainly tried. And so as a result of that, our take on Time Wars was very well received. Also, by the way, I should say this because this is probably going to confuse somebody. Because I'm sure somebody is like, well, why didn't Rodimus Prime cease to exist if Hot Rod still exists? Um, that was kind of what was going on in the Time Wars comic books. In a way, was this idea of like a paradox, and there were like storms and stuff on Earth, and da 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 da. We had to make things right. We went the exact opposite route. We went the route of what a lot of comic books do, which is that even though Galvatron came back in time and he thought he could change time in a way that would benefit him, right? That is for sure his motivation. Our take on it was that he was wrong, that he did not understand how time travel worked in our game world, and that he was from one of many possible futures. So that even if he had, for instance, killed Megatron, which at one point he realizes he cannot, change time. He's now from a different timeline. Um, he does try to kill Megatron because he doesn't want the competition. But at any rate, um, yeah, that was how we did it. Was no matter what they do, they're not going to change time. There are no paradoxes, and so as such, yes, you can have Hot Rod and Rodimus Prime coexist. You know, um, I don't want to confuse anybody, but that also then meant that there are certain other characters that we had two of, like RC. Um, and so uh we did different things with the two RCs, where they were both going in separate directions and living very different lives. But yeah, I think that's probably a pretty good stopping point. Hopefully, I've given you guys kind of a glimpse into our Time Wars games that we ran. Um As always, if you guys have any questions about anything that I was talking about in today's video, just drop me a comment and I'm happy to try to clear up anything. Also, as always, we would really appreciate it if you just took a second to hit the like button. It helps us out. I think it helps with channel visibility. It helps other people find us and learn that we exist. Also, make sure you're still subscribed. YouTube loves to unsubscribe people without telling them, so that would be awesome as well. And I think that's it for me for today. So from everybody here at the longest running superhero role-playing game on Earth, we hope you guys have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.